We've all been waiting for it. I don't know that it was that surprising, but you host on Sundays with Dan Byer. I host on Saturdays, and this past Saturday we were Jason Martin and I, my Saturday partner, were coming off right after the Steelers-Lions preseason game. Mm-hmm. And I bring it up because Mike Tomlin said, hey, we don't need to name a starter yet. I believe I'm paraphrasing the quote, but he goes, we got another week of Steelers on Steelers before we figure out who's the quarterback. So don't know how intense the practices were this week, but the news does come down just a few hours ago. Justin Fields will not be the starter. Russell Wilson, the veteran, who, he has been starting the preseason games, did lead a touchdown drive in their most recent game, has been named their starter. Mm-hmm. Week 1, your reaction to just the big picture news, then we'll talk about the big picture, what it all means for the team.
Yeah, no surprise that they went with the veteran. A Pittsburgh Steelers team that has been, hovering around 500, right in the playoff mix for the last 3 years or so. And, they're not going to want to go with I don't want to call them a project, but it would be a project situation. It's a new situation, new team. And, for him to be thrown into that thrust into that position to be the guy that leads that team that's pretty veteran-laden would have been a little bit of a shock. I personally would have probably gone with Fields. I think he has the more upside and could, possibly be, more than what they bargained for at this point. But right now, going with Russell Wilson's the safe bet, and Mike Tomlin fits that bill a little bit.
So what I find interesting about this, and tell me if I'm crazy. So you use the word project with Justin Fields. I think that's probably the fair and accurate thing to say. What I find interesting is, I get it, right, is this is the time of year where all 32 teams think they got a shot, we got an opportunity with this, that. Thing with the Steelers that's unique is obviously, look, very tough division, very tough schedule. Mm-hmm. So I do think if you believe that Russell Wilson is the better quarterback, I don't have a fundamental issue with saying you're the starter.
Right.
I guess where my issue comes in is that Justin Fields is on the final year of his rookie contract. Obviously, they can do the 5th-year option, whatever. But I bring it up because it's like all of it is just an interesting scenario because Russell Wilson's a veteran, but it's not like he's been with the organization and you have equity with him and you don't want to put him on the bench because you've been with him for 15 years and you want to show respect to him. So you don't have that. But you also don't have that much time with Justin Fields. And that's what I find interesting is if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, you bring in Justin Fields because you kind of want to know if he's your future. Yeah. And so I look at the Steelers' schedule. As I mentioned, it gets pretty tough on the back end. They start with at Atlanta, at Denver, Chargers, Colts, Raiders early in the season, middle of October. So there's a scenario where, Kirk Cousins coming off the injury, Bo Nix a rookie quarterback, Justin Herbert, we don't really know what his status is with the foot. I mean, we think he's going to play, but you get the point.
Yeah.
They could start 4-2. They could start 5-3. And it's just this weird thing where it's like they're not really a contender, but they might have a good enough record where they're in the mix, but they won't really be in the mix. And it just, to me, feels like it's going to be a slippery slope and kind of a tricky spot to kind of just figure out, okay, if we do want to give Justin the chance, like when do we do it? Because there's a chance that they're not terrible to start the season.
Yeah, even with what you're just saying right now, I see a scenario where they also can be 2-4 and 1-5.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And so, Denver's supposed to be better. The Colts will be better this year as well, barring Anthony Richardson taking a step back. But, all these games are hard in the NFL, and so you can't really call it. I agree with what your take was, but there's also the flip side of that, right? So say they start slow, Justin Fields will be in early.
Yeah.
And so I think they've seen enough in practice to know what they have. Mm-hmm. Now, game time is different, but a coach like Mike Tomlin that puts a lot of stock in practice, he's going to have to prove it there first. And I think that's probably what we're kind of missing or glossing over here is they've seen enough of him to know what they have. They want to go with the proven person that has a little cachet, and I'm sure the cachet matters a little bit here.
Do you think that, you mentioned all the practice stuff. Do you think that's a variable from the perspective of, you do have a lot of vets in that locker room that, to your point, last couple of years, whatever it is, 9-7, 9-8, 10-7 a year ago, made the playoffs, lost to the Bills a year ago. So I just bring it up because do you think that's part of it? Is you got vets in that locker room. Justin Fields may have the higher upside, but you know that Russell will, and it becomes almost a slippery slope with your own locker room of if we go with the young guy, then it looks like we're maybe giving up on the season if Russ has been better at practice.
100%.
Yep.
That's the point. And also a team like the Steelers with Mike Tomlin, he's such a good coach and such a competitive coach. For them, going into any season thinking that you're going to tank or not try to win,
yeah, of course,
isn't going to happen. So if the Steelers really want to get to a point of solving that quarterback position for the long term, they're going to have a bad season here.
Sure.
And Mike Tomlin's not the right guy to have if they want that to happen.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just be curious because, again, and by the way, to your point, like, yeah, they could be 2-4, but then if they're 2-4, then it makes the decision to go to Justin Fields easier.
Yes.
What I'm saying is, what if you're 4-3 and Russ is completing 63% of his passes and you know he's not really the answer, but again, you're trying not to give up on the season. So you said it earlier, I think we all agree, Justin Fields is a project. I mean, it's, again, a weird situation where he wasn't great in Chicago, but he won some games down the stretch. Just what do you make of him kind of big picture, where he is, what he like? Because, again, I would guess at some point he is probably going to get a shot.
Yeah.
And just curious for your perspective on what he could potentially be, what he might not be.
It's a very funny thing because I think he's really talented. He's just not polished enough. And then you go from a couple of systems having new coordinators in Chicago, you go to another new coordinator here in Pittsburgh, and so there's just we don't know what we have, and I don't think they know. And so, like, there has to be some time and some equity put into the actual progression of what he can be and what his game can be. And so it's the biggest question mark you can make, that's just him.
Sure.
Yeah.
And what is the process, in your opinion, for Mike Tomlin? I mean, obviously, again, if it goes really well, so let's say you start with the Falcons week 1, okay?
Yep.
Kirk Cousins coming off an injury, maybe you get the win there. Broncos week 2, road game, whatever. The point I'm trying to make is, what if you are, and by the way, you play the NFC East as well, so by the end of October, you also got the Giants and you got the Commanders. I'm a Jaden Daniels guy, so I think they could be good, but they, still, again, a rookie quarterback. So what do you think the process is of how much wiggle room do you give Russ before you actually pull the plug and or does it all just depend on what's going on in practice?
I think it depends on the flow of the season as well, right? Like, if he's playing like he played in Denver last year, I thought he was playing good enough for them to make the playoffs, and they were down the stretch right in the playoff mix. That situation soured. I think coming into that season, the coach didn't even believe in the player anyway, and so the first sign of anything faltering, he was going to pull the plug, right?
Yep.
And so that's what happened there. I think with Mike Tomlin, the guy that, again, wants to win, I think the leash will be a little bit longer than that. So I think he's going to have a chance to actually prove himself this year, and I don't think you go to Justin Fields unless the season is over at this point. If you're going to make the decision to start Russ, I don't think you bring him in just because you're in a rough patch. I think you got to ride out Russell.
So two quick thoughts on that then.
Yeah.
One, it is kind of funny. You look at the Russ stats, and I'm not saying that he was great last year, but 66% completion percentage, 26 touchdowns, 8 TDs.
Yep.
Now, to be fair, just over 3,000 yards passing, so under 7 yards per completion. He's not chucking it downfield. He's not Mahomes or Allen or whatever.
Right.
He wasn't terrible, though. And so, but are you of the belief, just having watched him, knowing the sport better than the rest of us, like, do you think he's because there is this narrative that, like, he's totally cooked, he's a placeholder, you're going to go to Justin Fields eventually, maybe Justin Fields is the guy, maybe he's not, whatever. Do you think Russell Wilson's totally done? Do you think there's any way that he plays well enough where maybe he is the answer a little bit longer than just a 8 to 12 game window this year?
I think there is a scenario where that happens. That doesn't mean he's playing for 4 or 5 more years. I don't think that. But when you talk about a 2-year window where you can still get some Russell Wilson, I guess some Russell Wilson magic. I don't know what that even means anymore. But if you can get some Russell Wilson,
let him cook anymore. No cooking.
Right. I didn't go that far.
We took the spatula from a Lamar.
I did not go that far. But Russell having 2 really solid years is not out the window and not out the question.
Sure. Let me ask you a question. I don't know if you have any thought on this or you can comment. Why does everyone hate Russell Wilson so much? Like it's unbelievable to me. And I've obviously never been in a locker room with him, and I'm sure you know guys that have, and certainly not asking for any insight that you can't share. But Because it's weird, because it does feel like him and Tomlin kind of have a vibe. Like Tomlin's spoken very highly of him. I think that they have a pretty good relationship. I can't speak to him with the Steelers, but as you said, soured really quick with Sean Payton, although to your point, I don't know if Sean Payton ever even gave him a chance.
Did not.
Obviously soured with Pete Carroll, and we've obviously heard plenty of former teammates that have had their own thoughts on him as they've kind of transitioned out of football. What do you make of why maybe that people just curious?
Yeah. Locker dynamics are weird.
Sure.
You come in as a third round guy, a guy that I'm sure worked his butt off early on to get that position, gets thrown into the fire, team starts to win, quarterback position is glorified no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at that team in particular with all the names and all the players that they have.
Sure.
Ego come into play.
Mm-hmm.
That's really all it boils down to, because when they were winning, none of this came out.
Of course.
So then when you have a couple of losses, one guy doesn't want to be there anymore, this guy doesn't get paid. It's just a lot of situations that could happen in that locker room with the dynamic. So, Russell Wilson getting a lot of the credit for those teams winning. I think it's fair that the other players could have a little bit of I don't want to say animosity, but a little bit of an edge against him for getting some of that special treatment that he got. So I think it just comes down to ego and players wanting their fair due of the credit.
Interesting. Yeah, well, it's interesting because he did make the playoffs his first 5 years in the NFL, which is kind of crazy to think about. But to your point, it was a defensive-led team. It's whatever. And it was actually when they let Russ cook that was when all the problems started. But for people who are joining us, Russell Wilson has been named the starter of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Last little thought from you, Kerry, is how do you think this ends this season? In other words, does Russ make it all 17 games? Does he make it 12 and they flip to Justin Fields? Does he make it 3 and it's a debacle? Because you said like
really?
If it goes well, could have a little a short runway here of a year or two.
Yeah.
How do you think it ends up?
It's not going to end well for the Steelers, but I don't know if it's going to be Russell Wilson's fault.
Sure,
they're in a tough division. They're not going to make the playoffs. I don't feel personally. It's just too top heavy. I mean, Baltimore's going to make the playoffs. Cleveland's going to make the playoffs, and Cincinnati's going to possibly make the playoffs, right? So, or any combination of those three, right? 4 teams is not going to make it. So, unless an injury happens, which we're going to knock on wood and hope it doesn't, they're not going to make the playoffs. So it's going to be, Russell Wilson, if he plays very, 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 very good, solid football, you won't be able to put it on him. And I think that's the possible outcome, the best possible outcome in this situation.
Let me ask you one last question on this. So we're entering the 2024 season.
Mm-hmm.
You said at best Russell Wilson has 2 years and that Justin Fields is a project that does have upside.
Yeah.
Do you believe, this is hard to say, that the Pittsburgh Steelers starting quarterback to open the 2026 season, so 3 openers from now, 2 calendar years from next Sunday, do you believe that person is on the roster right now?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
If they
didn't give Justin Fields the chance this year, in a new year, in a fresh year, he's not going to be there in 2 years.
Well, and that's my and that's why I'm not surprised, because again, hosting on Saturdays, I've listened to the last 2 Mike Tomlin post preseason game press conferences, and it felt like this is where it was going. But I just don't know why you bring in Justin Fields on the last year of a contract if you're not going to throw him out there to see if he could be. But then again, it's tough. And listen, I'm far from Mike Tomlin's won a lot more football games than I have, believe it or
sure?
not.
How many?
Yeah.
How many you got? You got like.
I mean, we won a little bit in high school. No big deal. I wasn't coaching. I mean, I was on the field making plays.
Yes, sir.
But yeah, no, he knows more than I do. But it's just like I said, it just feels weird that you bring in Justin Fields last year of a rookie deal, and you basically again he might get run, he might not, and then God forbid he doesn't get run. Russ is good enough, goes 9-8, not really good enough not really bad enough where you can pull him, and then Justin Fields goes somewhere and has success.
Aaron, but the one thing we haven't talked in this discussion so far is he's going to have a couple of packages in these games. He's going to play.
Yeah.
And early on in the preseason, before the preseason in camps, he was flirting playing other positions, so don't forget about that.
Oh. So we're talking the Terrell Pryor route? Okay.
There you go.
All right, insider Kerry Rhodes here has the insight on Justin Fields. future All-Pro wide receiver.
All right.
You are the former All-Pro, so you would know better than I am.